Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. It is 12 o'clock. We are going to get started in just 1 minute. So we appreciate that everybody is on and spending the next, half hour to hour with us to talk about 1031 exchange. So I am going to just wait just a couple minutes. I know we have some more people coming on and we have our other speaker coming on. My name is Michelle Fitzpatrick. So I am with Northern 1031 Exchange. I am joined here with my associate, Brent Boucher. He is in residential lending. And Brent, do you want to introduce yourself and let you know who you are and what you do?
Yes, thanks so much, Michelle. Again, my name is Brent Boucher. I'm a residential loan officer here at Northern Bank. I work directly for the bank. I've been with the bank for 20 years. I've worked with Michelle and her team on many 1031 transactions. I actually came from a successful closing this morning. We, as a portfolio lender, we're really well positioned to assist with 1031 customers. Not all transactions fit into the traditional mold of like a Fannie or Freddie loan. We can close loans in an LLC where a lot of these transactions have to close in the same entity that sold the property. So Michelle and her team are the experts, but we work very closely, and we're here to advise on the mortgage side. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Brent. You've been really, really helpful in so many transactions. So we do certainly appreciate having an expert like you working with our clients. So if you have any lending questions along the way, Brent is absolutely the person. But we are going to start talking a little bit about what a successful exchange looks like. So in a roadmap for a successful exchange. Feel free, I'm going to give you just a couple housekeeping items before we start, just like I do with any webinar. So we will be recording this. So anytime we record a session, it is going to be sent out to all of the people that registered. So you're just consenting that you want to be recorded if you ask any questions or if you turn on your camera. If not, you can certainly disconnect now and know that this will be sent to you later on. And we are going to be monitoring the chat for any questions. But again, this is going to be a small group, so you can certainly unmute, you can turn on your camera, and you can ask questions along the way. The way we wanted to format this today was just to have a nice little conversation, question and answer about what a successful 1031 exchange looks like. What's that kind of roadmap look like? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Hopefully you have a really good overview of what 1031 exchange is, and we'll kind of get into, brief little snippets of it, but that's what our plan is today. We're going to probably talk for about a half hour, maybe 40 minutes, and then we'll save plenty of time at the end for questions if you have any specific scenarios that you want to kind of run by us. So now I'm going to introduce my associate, John Starling. John is here. We're in different offices. Hi, John. So John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Northern 1031 Exchange?
So I joined Northern Bank to create a company to allow Northern's clients to utilize 1031 exchange about 12 years ago. And Michelle and I teamed up right at the very beginning of that reorganization. And so together we provide 1031 services for individuals and partnerships and corporations in order to help them avoid paying tax on the sale of their real estate.
Awesome, John. And tell me, why don't you tell everybody what what the real job a QI does? Why do you need a QI in a 1031 exchange?
Well, you have to have someone to exchange with. If you just sell your property to one person and you buy a property, a replacement property from another person, you don't have an exchange, you have a sale, which is a taxable event, and then you have a purchase. If you exchange, then you don't have to pay tax. That's what the code says, and that was enacted over 100 years ago by Congress saying, hey, listen, we agree that if you're swapping property or exchanging property, you really don't have any money to pay the tax because you're just swapping property. And so that's what 1031 is all about. If you don't have a qualified intermediary and you're selling to one person and buying from another, then you've got a taxable event. So the qualified intermediary acts as the entity that you exchange with.
So what taxes are deferred? If you are selling a property in Massachusetts and let's say you buy in Florida, what taxes are deferred? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it both? What is it?
Absolutely. So yeah, so when you sell a property that you've owned as an investment property, and you've owned it for some period of time, 2, 4, 10, 12, 15 years, you've been depreciating that property during the time that you own it. So you have avoided paying tax on a big part of your income that you received over the course of the years that you've rented it. You have to also pay, so you have to pay tax on that depreciation that you did not pay tax on over the course of the life of the time that you own the property. Secondly, you've got federal and state taxes on the profit. So if you bought it for $500,000 and you sold it for $1 million, you've got $500,000 worth of profit. You have to pay capital gains tax, which is 15 or 20%, depending on your tax bracket. You have to pay the federal NIIT tax, which is 3.8%. You have to pay that depreciation recapture tax, which is 25% of the amount of depreciation that you've written off during the time that you've owned it. And lastly, you have to pay the state of Massachusetts tax if your property is located in Massachusetts, which is 5% or 5.1, Michelle, is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
And so 5.1, and then if your profit is over $1 million, you're going to have to pay an additional 4% on any profit over $1 million. So Massachusetts has really what you would call a 9% tax on everything over $1 million, 5% tax on anything under $1 million. So now we've got 4 basic taxes that we will be avoiding by exchanging rather than just selling and buying.
And I think a lot of times when people call, I think they think it's probably a loophole or if it's something that the wealthy use. And I mean, this is something, I think it's becoming more and more common for the average person that just happens to own an investment property. They may own a 2-family house that they inherited or that they bought 40, 50 years ago. And now their kids may not want it, or, it may need too much more work than they want to put in. Is this something for kind of the everyday investor, the everyday person, not the,
Absolutely,
or is
it
it something for the wealthy?
Yeah. So back in the day, we like to say back in the day, before the IRS adopted practical procedures, 1031 was for the wealthy because you had to hire an attorney. The attorney had to draft a lot of documents, and the attorney actually had to take title to the property that you were selling and then convey it to the third party. And then the attorney would have to go out and buy the property that you wanted to buy as your replacement property and then deed it to you. He actually had to go on title.
Yeah.
And so exchanges cost $50,000 or more. And so then it became only for the wealthy. But when the IRS back in the late 1990s created a revenue procedure that outlined a specific process for the QI to follow so that there would be a step-by-step process to have an intermediary intervene, and they allowed direct deeding of the property from the buyer to the seller and from the seller to the
buyer.
buyer,
Yep.
excuse me. So, that brought the cost down, and now it's just less than $2,000 in order to effect an exchange. And so now everybody can do it.
That's right. And, I feel like a lot of our exchange clients are typically the one and dones. They may have one property, and I mean, we have big clients that have multiple properties, but this is for the everyday person, I think.
Anybody that owns property that's not their primary residence and they want to sell so they can buy better, bigger, more, they have a very, very good opportunity to avoid the tax on the sale of those properties that they're trying to liquidate.
Yeah. So let's go step by step in what it looks like. So we have realtors on this presentation. We have mortgage brokers. We have investors on this. So step one, is typically that conversation. Sometimes I talk to people 2 years out that call me and say, you know what, I'm thinking about selling a property. I haven't done anything yet. We don't necessarily need to be having that conversation 2 years out, but what are some of the things that you think are good conversation points to have, talking about title, talking about ownership, talking about tax basis prior to even listing the property? So do you want to go through some of the things people want to think about before they even call a realtor and engage engage a realtor to sell their property?
Well, yeah, that's a wide variety of things to talk about.
It is.
Obviously.
It is.
But
so maybe if we narrow it down to, ownership, what will that look like because of the requirements of 1031 exchange?
Yeah, and I think that, obviously that the topic of ownership is important, because if you own the property in an LLC, in a partnership LLC with someone else, you and that other person have to be in agreement to go in to buy the replacement property, unless you make your decision well in advance of listing the property. If you do, then you can take steps to distribute the property out of the LLC into the individual partners, so that the individual partners can go their separate ways if they all don't want to go together on the replacement property. Remember, Michelle, the same taxpayer that sold the relinquished property has to purchase the replacement property. That means if it's owned in an LLC, the LLC has to buy it. If it's owned by tenants by the entireties or tenants in common, and by the way, tenants by the entirety is husband and wife. Tenants in common would be two people that are not married that own property together as, business associates, so to speak. So, it's important for them to look at upfront, before they list their property, how they own the property they intend to sell, the old property, and how they want to hold ownership in the new property.
So if people are trying to split away from their partners in an LLC, it's prudent for them to kind of get conversations and making some changes in that, year, 2 years leading up to that sale. But now let's just say a husband and wife are selling a property and they're not planning on divorcing, they're planning on staying together, and they're going to move forward with the exchange. When would they need to get in touch with us? Would it be, they don't need 2 years now? When do they typically engage your service, John?
Typically during the time of the listing of the property. We'd want to talk to them to make sure they understand the rules and the regulations and the timelines, because the timelines can become very critical. You only have 45 days to identify after the closing of your relinquished property, and that's to identify the property or properties that you intend to purchase. And you have an additional 135 days after that 45 days to close on the replacement property. So they have to be shopping well in advance of the sale of the closing of the property. Now, they don't want to shop too far in advance, because properties that are on the market today probably won't be on the market in 6 months from now or a year from now, certainly.
Right. So from once they have an offer, so they've listed their property with the real estate agent, they now have an offer on the property. Are they able to take a deposit down on the property? And where should that deposit go? I think that's the first question. So where does the deposit go? Does it come to us? Does it go to the real estate agent? Does it go into their pocket?
So if they want to take a deposit, we have some flexibility there. So the deposit can go into the client's account, but the client must write a check or transfer that money from their account to the qualified intermediary's account prior to the closing of the property.
So what you're saying, so let me just clarify, what you're saying is that they can take a check, they can have constructive receipt of the funds before the closing, before it transfers the title.
Correct. It's just
after it transfers this title, it needs to come to us.
Correct. And at the time of the transfer of the title, if we don't have it, then it's considered boot or cash out.
Okay.
It cannot be put into the exchange after the closing. So they have to immediately rewrite a new check to Northern 1031 so we can deposit it into their escrow account so that they will be able to use that money towards the purchase of their replacement property. Remember, you have to use all the cash from the sale of the relinquished property towards the purchase of the replacement if you don't want to pay any tax. Any cash that you don't use towards replacement property gets taxed, and that's at the highest tax rates.
Okay, so we've got step one down. They've engaged their real estate agent. They've taken a contract. They've maybe accepted a deposit. And now are we stepping in and engaging our services? So once we have a purchase and sale agreement, once the client has a purchase and sale agreement, what do we do on our side? They call us up and say, okay, I have a purchase and sale. I have a deposit. What are we going to do?
So we make sure we get a copy of that contract. And then that's when we engage with our written agreement, the exchange agreement, which is the framework of what's going to happen from that point forward. So we take the contract, we get a copy, they sign the contract, we get a copy, we then prepare our exchange agreement and we prepare our assignment of that contract to the qualified intermediary. That's the sale of the relinquished property to the qualified intermediary is on paper by assignment of that contract. And then we prepared additional documents. One, of course, important document is a instruction letter to the closing attorney so that the closing attorney understands that the funds from the sale will not go to the seller, but they will go to the qualified intermediary to Northern 1031 so that we can hold that money to be used towards purchasing the replacement property.
Yeah, so you're doing that all behind the scenes, kind of seamlessly. Yep.
Yeah, that's all behind the scenes. The buyer and the realtor and the closing attorney will be involved, but only to the degree that they have to sign a few extra documents after they sign their agreement to sell, their P&S agreement. Then they have to sign their exchange agreement and their assignment agreement with us, and that's it. That gets them started. Perfect. And then they go shopping.
So now we have all the exchange agreements. They are inching up towards their closing for their sale. So they've got 3 weeks before their sale. Can they go shopping for a replacement property before they even close on their relinquished?
Absolutely. It just depends on how comfortable they are with the purchase agreement. If the money, if the down payment or deposit money is non-refundable, at the point that it's non-refundable, then they can start actually making offers on replacement properties. Remember, if the buyer backs out on them on the sale of their relinquished property, and they've already written a contract on their replacement property, then the buyer is going to is going to lose his money, and then our exchange client he won't be out of pocket because he'll have that money to reimburse himself for the money that he put out as a down payment on the replacement property. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. And I think one of the questions that people ask too is that it's important to know that you can use your own proceeds. So if you have a contract to sell and you're putting a contract on to purchase, but you have not closed on your sale yet, we, as the qualified intermediary, do not have the proceeds. So can they use their own proceeds out of pocket to put a deposit down on the replacement property without invalidating the exchange?
Absolutely. They can put the deposit down, and then at the closing of the replacement property, we can reimburse them with exchange funds so
Perfect.
that they can get their money back that they put down as an initial deposit.
Perfect. So we get to the closing. Closing goes seamlessly. The proceeds come directly to the qualified intermediary. We can utilize those for the replacement property purchase. What happens if somebody accepts a contract on the sale and they don't even know about a 1031 exchange? They get all the way down the line. They're 2 days away from closing on their sale. And their attorney tells them, by the way, why aren't you doing an exchange? Can they still initiate that if they have not considered it up until that point?
Well, they
Before the
certainly
closing.
can. They certainly can with Northern 1031 because we provide that extra service. A lot of QIs will say that they need to have the contract at least 5 days prior to the closing in order to effect a 1031 exchange. We have done exchanges on the day of the closing when we find out about the exchange when the seller is in the attorney's office signing his paperwork to close on the transaction. So we can do it right up until the closing. Now, after the closing, it becomes very, very difficult to go back and try to set up an exchange if you've already closed on the property that you're selling. So
Okay.
yes, number one, Michelle, we can absolutely do a 1031 exchange, even if the seller decides to do it on the day of the closing.
Yes, and we have done them.
Number
Attorneys don't love it,
two,
but we have done them.
we have done them before. We don't like it because it creates quite a stir.
Fire drill.
Yeah. And it's like a fire drill, trying to get all the documents completed in several hours instead of several days.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I mean, I think that
we have had people call us and say, look, we just closed. And now we found out we really want to do a 1031 exchange because we didn't know about it. And if they just closed that day or the day before, and the attorney is willing to redo the settlement statement and have everybody re-sign the settlement statement and redisperse the money in the proper fashion so that the closing actually gets delayed another day to that following day, then we can accommodate that. But as you can tell from what I just said, it's very difficult to get an attorney to go back and reclose a property that they've already closed.
Yeah. So John, I know we have a few questions, but I just kind of want to walk through a couple more steps, and then I'm going to throw a few slides up because I know that somebody's looking for slides just to kind of see the flow, the way we're talking through it. But so Deidre, we're going to be bringing those slides up in just a minute. I just want to kind of get towards the end. Once you sell your relinquished property, we have the proceeds. You're now purchasing a replacement property. You've put a deposit down. We are sending the funds towards that replacement property. And now you've bought it. Your exchange, if you've used all your proceeds, and we're going to get into the details of this, but your exchange is then complete. Or John, as the qualified intermediary, what are you doing from here? Are you filing tax returns for your client? What are you providing them to indicate that they've done an exchange and how they handle it going forward?
Absolutely. So, the closing attorney is going to send a form to the IRS and report the sale. So the IRS is going to be looking for tax on the profit from the sale. We provide to our client's CPA the documentation to show that he sold the property, the closing statement, the identification form, and the closing statement for the replacement property, so that the CPA on the tax return for the year of the sale, he can attach a form called an 8824, which is basically telling the IRS, hey, we sold this property and we're now shifting the basis from the old property to the new property and eliminating the opportunity for the IRS to collect tax on that particular sale. So we provide a package to the CPA or tax preparer that our client uses, and then it takes that CPA about 15 to 30 minutes to fill out the necessary form in order to negate the tax.
Perfect. So, John, I think we're going to just pop the slide deck up real quick. But before I do, there's just a couple questions that are in the chat that I'm going to ask you to answer. The first one was, what happens if 3 properties are no longer available to buy by the time they need to buy it? So let's say what happens let's talk about the ID form, because that's really what they're asking. If they ID 3 properties and they can't close on any of these properties, what happens?
Well, if they've ID'd the 3 properties and they've passed their 45-day identification period, and they can't buy any of the properties, then they have no opportunity to go back and name more properties because they passed their shopping period or their ID period.
Yeah.
So it's always
unfortunate. That's unfortunate.
It's extremely important for the realtor and the client to make sure that they have a contract on at least the one property that they would like to get prior to the 45 days. That way, the properties that property doesn't have a chance of being sold out from under them.
Yeah. So it's not a requirement that they have a contract, but it's highly recommended.
We stress it, and we have a very, very low failure rate. Our failure rate is probably 1% because we encourage all of our clients to make sure that during that shopping period, they actually write an offer to purchase. If they don't have a P&S, that's not a problem. But if they've got an offer to purchase that's signed by both parties, then that seller can't go out and sell that property to another potential buyer.
Thank you. So the next question was, does it apply to all states? So I'm assuming that means, does 1031 apply to all states? I'm in Massachusetts for reference. Usually brokers hold deposits and escrows. Oh, okay. So I think the question was when we were talking about holding a deposit. So when John said that you can hold, it doesn't matter who holds the deposit. In Massachusetts, yes, the real estate agent holds the deposit at the purchase and sale. Some states, other states may be different. If there's a real estate agent that's not involved, an escrow agent can do it, or an attorney, but it doesn't matter in any state.
Yeah, in Massachusetts, it's very common for the realtor to hold the deposit money, and they can do that. The deposit money can go to the realtor. The realtor will either credit that towards his commission, or he'll wire the funds to the closing attorney on the day of the closing. As long as we get the money at the end of the closing, we're satisfied, and
Perfect.
the IRS is satisfied.
So we got another kind of question comment, and it was where we're based out of. So we are based out, I'm in Woburn, and Northern Bank is based in Middlesex County. And you're right, Deidre, the homes go fast here. They are up 1 minute and they are over asking price by 10% or 20% literally the next day. So yes, 1031s exchanges, we do them. 90% of our exchanges begin or end somewhere in Massachusetts or New England. Of course, we do exchanges in every state, but yeah, all of our clients are kind of facing the same dilemma that properties go very, very quickly in Massachusetts. In trying to secure them is a challenge, and that's where really great real estate agents come in. We want those bulldog real estate agents that can get the offers accepted. A couple tips, we were just talking with an attorney literally right before we got on this call, and he was even saying that he's got an exchange client that's selling a property and buying a property knowing that he's going to pay more for the replacement property. And he was willing to almost overspend on the replacement property, knowing that he was going to defer more in tax than what he was overspending. So depends on the strategy. But yeah, getting a property under agreement for replacement in the time frame is difficult. But yeah, possible, because John said,
I think the
all
way
of our
this
exchanges, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say most of our exchanges are success. So people are successfully finding properties. Oh, John, you just froze.
Oh, how about now?
Your face is frozen, but oh, there we go. We're back again. So I'm going to hop up.
You can hear me
I'm
now?
going to put my, yep. And I'm going to put my slide deck up while we are here. So you can see my slides. I can pull them up easy. So I just wanted to pop up this. Can you see this? All right. I just wanted to pop up the flow chart.
Yes. Now it's not on presentation mode, so we can see. There you go.
I just switched it.
Okay.
So this is really the flow. So we've got our taxpayer, our seller, our exchanger, however you want to call them. They are going to get into contract with the real estate agent. They are going to go to the sale and directly deed that property to their buyer. The buyer is going to send the proceeds directly to the qualified intermediary. At that time, your clock starts ticking. You have 180 days to complete your 1031 exchange, and you have that 45-day window for your ID period. Once the taxpayer finds a replacement property, what they're going to do is get into contract with that seller. At the closing, they're going to directly deed the property from the seller to our taxpayer, and we're going to use those proceeds. So that's kind of the flow of it. Does that answer your question, Deirdre, for the flow of the 1031 exchange? And if it doesn't, just unmute, because I can't see my chat right this second.
Yeah, I was just wondering something with a little bit more granular detail to give to my seller, where kind of they really know the rules of engagement.
Sure. So I have a step-by-step guide that's in a PDF version, and I have a digital brochure which gives you all the information that they need. The 45-day ID, the 180-day exchange period, in the rules. So we can certainly talk about the ID rules too.
Okay.
So when you get to your 45th, you have 45 days to identify your replacement property. And the IRS is very, very specific on how you can identify replacement property. They are trying to avoid people just literally pulling a page out of the yellow pages and saying, hey, I want to ID all of these properties. So it's very specific. Most people that are selling one property and buying one property typically use the 3 property rule. And that essentially says that you can identify 3 properties. It doesn't matter what the value is. You can buy 1, you can buy 2, or you can buy all 3 of them. And again, that's really the most common rule that people use. Now, if we have somebody that is selling an apartment building and they want to buy 5 properties for each of their children, the 3 property rule won't work because they can only identify 3 properties. Now, so they have to move on to the 200% rule. The 200% rule allows people to diversify, and it tells them that they can identify an unlimited number of properties, but the aggregate value of all the properties combined cannot exceed more than 200% of the properties that you've sold. So, for instance, somebody sells for $1 million, they can identify $2 million worth of replacement property, and they can identify 10 $200,000 properties. So that's how that rule works. It's a little bit more restrictive, but it really helps you diversify. And the last rule is the 95% rule, used in a very limited capacity, because what that says is that you can identify an unlimited number of properties, and it doesn't matter what the value of the properties are. You can exceed 200%. But once you identify the properties, you have to purchase 95% of them. So you're essentially buying everything that you identify. So that's, those are the rules to choose from. And that's a really important component that we work with as you start approaching your 45th day. We're working with you to make sure that you're able to successfully complete your exchange by being able to purchase one of the properties you've identified.
Michelle, let's look at those rules one more time from this perspective. The 3 property rule is there for the purpose of consolidation. You know, you're selling either multiple properties or you're selling one property and you're going to buy one property. The 200% rule is when you want to diversify. So the IRS says, okay, we'll let you can buy as many properties as you like, as long as the value of all of those properties added up together equal the sales price of the relinquished property. So that's what the 200% rule is for those people that want to diversify into a bunch of smaller properties. And the 95% rule is for those people that really want to buy a portfolio of properties from someone that has accumulated, 5 or 10 or 15 properties. They've got them in basically what you would call a portfolio, and they want to sell the whole thing to one buyer. So now you can't use the 3 property rule because you've got multiple properties you're trying to buy, and you can't use the 200% rule because he might have 10 properties in his portfolio, and it might be $10 million instead of $2 million. In your example, you said if you sell $1 million property, you can only identify up to $2 million under the 200% rule of replacement properties. So that won't work if you're buying a portfolio. The 95% rule will work because now you can buy an unlimited amount of properties. You just have to close, and there's no price limit, so you just have to close on all of them, or 95% of them.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. Thank you. So, I think that's the 8824 form. I think one of the things that we want, and I don't need to necessarily have this up anymore. If anybody needs another slide, let me know, but I'm going to stop sharing and go back to this mode. I think when we talk through these webinars, I think the most important thing people can walk away with, and these are always my top, and John, you may have some top too, but the first one is to make sure that you engage the qualified intermediary prior to closing. The second most important thing, I think, is that you need to know that in order to defer all of your capital gains taxes, there are 2 rules to defer all of your capital gains taxes. And the first one is that you need to buy a replacement property that's equal or greater in value. And you need to use all of your exchange proceeds. So there are people that think they can only reinvest the profit of the property. Oh, I bought it for $200. It's now $1 million. I just want to reinvest the $800. That is still a taxable event. You can't, unfortunately, 1031 exchange is not a good vehicle to try to either get rid of your mortgage, and we'll talk about that, or to just reinvest profit. You're going to get taxed on some portion of it. So those are always my 2 biggest takeaways. John, what are your two biggest takeaways that you want people to absolutely remember going into an exchange?
Well, here's an important tidbit, and that is that if let's say you and your wife are selling a property, but only you are on title because you owned it prior to the marriage and it
Yeah.
just never got deeded to the spouse. So now when you sell, you have to buy the replacement property in your name. You can put your wife on it, but then you're diluting your ownership by 50%. So if you're buying $1 million property and you buy it together, then you're buying $500,000 worth of property as yourself individually. And if you owned $1 million property, now you're going to owe tax on $500,000 because you're buying down in value by $500,000. So you can't put the spouse on the deed if they weren't on the deed of the old property or the property you are relinquishing. Now, what you can do is deed it to your spouse later after the exchange is what the IRS calls old and cold.
Yes.
Then you can deed it to your spouse, and under Code 1041, there's no taxable event there. Even though you've sold half of the property basically to your spouse, there's not a taxable event there because that's a tax break for married couples.
Yep. So the other thing too is that I'm thinking of all the important things, and everything's important, but this is the other one that I was thinking of is I was looking at Brent's picture and thinking about the mortgage. People will say, you know, I have $1 million house, I'm selling it for $1 million. I have a $400,000 mortgage, so I only want to reinvest $600,000. The mortgage doesn't matter when it comes to an exchange. The IRS doesn't really care, because when you took out a mortgage, that was all tax-free. So you have to reinvest essentially the debt too. It doesn't necessarily need to be new debt because it can be replaced with cash, but you do have to replace all of it. So equal or greater in value and all the proceeds.
And don't forget, you can buy down in value. That's not a problem. It would be called a partial exchange.
Mhm.
And, you know, you would just end up paying tax on the money that on the value that you didn't spend. So if you sell for $1 million and you buy for 800,000, you're going to have to pay tax on 200,000. Better than paying tax on 500,000 or $6. If you've got
right.
if you bought it for 400 to start with, you know, if you bought it for 200 to start with and you sold it for $1 million, you're going to have to pay tax on 800,000. Let's say you just want to buy a $500,000 house because you're wanting to downsize so that you can move into it in 2 years after you have rented it out for a couple of years. You can do that, but you're going to have to pay tax. You're going to have to pay some tax, but you're going to avoid some tax as well.
Right. Right.
So it's always good to do a 1031, even if you're not avoiding all the tax. If you have a situation where you just, you know, you don't want to be in, you don't want to take out a new mortgage or some other situation like that.
Right.
So we didn't talk about, and we didn't want to talk about exchanges, other types of exchanges, but, you know, people can buy property that they want to fix up and they can use exchange funds to fix it up. It's called an improvement exchange. It allows them an additional 6 months after purchase to put extra exchange money into the new property. So for instance, let's say you sell a property for $1 million, you buy a property for 800,000 that needs a rehab at the kitchen and 2 bathrooms. So now you're going to spend 200 on a kitchen and 2 baths to renovate them. And as long as you get that job done within 6 months, you're golden and you don't have to pay any tax. So you are buying down in value, but you're using the extra money to improve the property. And so there's no tax.
Yeah, and we will do, so we do monthly webinars and we try to hit one specific topic every month. And they change every month. So, you know, sometimes we talk about vacation rentals in the safe harbor. In 1 month, we'll talk about reverse exchanges. Another month, we'll talk about improvement exchanges. So we really do try to go and highlight each component of the 1031 exchange process, because honestly, otherwise, John and I could sit here for 5, 6, 7 hours talking about everything that goes into 1031 exchange. So we do try to make it a little bit digestible. Next month, I think we're talking about handling funds. So it's more on the banking side, but we're going to be talking about handling funds and things that what a qualified intermediary does, trying to protect your funds and all the things that we do to ensure that your funds are protected. But we will be talking about improvement exchanges in a much deeper dive. But you can always go onto our website too. Under our 1031 website, we have a whole education page filled with all past webinars and articles that John and I have written about 1031 exchange. So if there is something specific that we didn't talk about today, it is absolutely on our website in our education page. So more to come on that.
How about, is there anyone that wants to unmute and ask a question?
Yeah, I think we answered all the questions. I know, Deidre, you were asking about the house that you're trying to deal with in Hawaii. Yeah, it's hard when you're not on the other side, when you're not on the sales side and you're just on the purchase side. You do have to kind of work with that client to make sure you know what the timeframes are for them.
Yeah.
So any other questions that people may have? Hopefully that gave you a good idea of kind of the step-by-steps and really the timeframes surrounded by the 1031 exchange leading up to it. And if you have any questions on lending and how that works with 1031 exchange, Brent is a great resource for that as well. So if there are any questions, feel free. Otherwise, know that this will be sent to you soon. Right after we finish this, the recording will be sent to you. If you want our user guides, just send me a quick email. I'll send that user guide out as well that you can send to your clients. I think that's all. So we're going to wrap up about 10 minutes early. So we're giving you 10 minutes back. Thank you all for joining. We really appreciate your time today. And if you have any questions, you can reach myself, John, Brent, and thank you. Thanks, Brent.